Sarah Beth Williams had always dreamed of seeing the Southwest. At 68, with her children grown and her late husband's pension finally providing some financial freedom, she decided it was time to fulfill that lifelong desire. The red rocks of Sedona, Arizona called to her like a siren song. Something about their ancient beauty and spiritual energy drew her in ways she couldn't quite explain to her worried daughter back in Ohio. "Mom, are you sure about this whole solo travel thing?" Jennifer had asked during their last phone call, her voice tight with concern. "I mean, staying in some stranger's house through one of those rental apps. What if something happens?" Sarah Beth had laughed it off then, the way mothers do when their adult children try to parent them. She'd raised 3 kids, survived the loss of her husband of 42 years, and navigated the complexities of modern technology well enough to book her own flights and accommodations. She wasn't some helpless elderly woman who needed constant supervision. She was an independent soul with wanderlust in her heart and enough good years left to make them count. The Airbnb listing had been perfect. A charming Adobe-style casita on the outskirts of Sedona, tucked away in a quiet residential area but close enough to the main attractions. The photos showed a cozy living space with southwestern decor, a small kitchen perfect for morning coffee, and a private patio where she could sit and watch the famous Arizona sunsets. The host, a man named David Martinez, had over 200 glowing reviews. Guests consistently praised his responsiveness, the cleanliness of the property, and the peaceful location. "Exactly what I was looking for," Sarah Beth had murmured to herself as she clicked the Book Now button on that crisp October morning, 3 weeks before her planned departure. The communication with David had been seamless. He'd responded to her booking within an hour, sending a warm welcome message with detailed check-in instructions and recommendations for local restaurants and hiking trails suitable for someone her age. His profile showed a middle-aged Hispanic man with kind eyes and a genuine smile, standing in front of what appeared to be the same casita she'd rented. Everything felt legitimate, professional, and safe. Sarah Beth arrived in Phoenix on November 14th, rented a compact car, and made the 2-hour drive north to Sedona with her heart full of anticipation. The landscape gradually transformed from desert plains to dramatic red rock formations that took her breath away. She pulled over twice just to take pictures, feeling like a teenager on her first road trip. The GPS led her through Sedona's main tourist areas, past art galleries and crystal shops, then into a residential neighborhood of modest homes and desert landscaping. The address took her down a quiet street called Coyote Ridge Drive, where houses sat on large lots separated by natural desert vegetation. It felt private and peaceful, exactly what she'd hoped for. Number 47. Coyote Ridge Drive was a small, single-story adobe home painted in warm terracotta, with a red tile roof and a wooden gate leading to the front entrance. Desert plants lined the walkway, and wind chimes hung from the covered porch, creating gentle music in the afternoon breeze. Sarah Beth felt a sense of calm wash over her as she parked in the gravel driveway. The lockbox was exactly where David had said it would be, attached to a fence post near the gate. She punched in the code he'd provided and retrieved the key, noting how smoothly everything worked. Inside, the casita was even more charming than the photos had suggested. Warm earth tones, comfortable furniture, and thoughtful touches like fresh flowers on the dining table and a basket of local snacks on the kitchen counter. Sarah Beth spent her first evening settling in, unpacking her clothes in the small bedroom and planning her itinerary for the next few days. She texted Jennifer a photo of herself on the patio with the red rocks visible in the distance, accompanied by a simple message: "Made it safely. It's beautiful here." The next morning brought perfect November weather, crisp and clear with brilliant blue skies. Sarah Beth drove into town and spent hours wandering through Tlaquepaque Arts Village, admiring handcrafted jewelry and pottery. She had lunch at a restaurant David had recommended, where the server was friendly and the food delicious. Everything felt right with the world. She documented her day through photos and short videos, sharing them on Facebook for Jennifer and her friends back home to see. Her posts garnered dozens of likes and comments from people who were either envious of her adventure or proud of her courage to travel alone. The validation felt good, reinforcing her decision to take this trip. That evening, she called Jennifer from the casita's patio, watching the sun paint the red rocks in deeper shades of crimson and gold. "How's the Airbnb, Mom?" Jennifer asked. "Everything working okay?" "It's perfect, honey. David, that's the host. He's thought of everything. There's even a guidebook on the coffee table with all his personal recommendations marked." "And you feel safe there?" Sarah Beth looked around at the peaceful surroundings, the solid adobe walls, the secure gate. "Completely safe. It's so quiet here, so peaceful. I think I could stay forever." The next day brought more exploration, a visit to the Chapel of the Holy Cross built into the red rocks, followed by some light shopping in uptown Sedona. Sarah Beth met a lovely couple from Canada at one of the Vortex sites, and they spent an hour talking about travel and the spiritual energy people claim to feel in Sedona. She was having the time of her life, but it was on the third day that things began to feel different. Sarah Beth woke up with an odd sense of unease she couldn't quite place. The morning light filtering through the bedroom curtains seemed dimmer somehow, and the usual cheerful sounds of birds in the desert had been replaced by an almost oppressive silence. She attributed it to the weather. Clouds had moved in overnight, creating an overcast sky that was unusual for Sedona. During breakfast on the patio, she noticed something that made her pause. The wind chimes that had been hanging from the porch were gone. Not fallen or broken, completely absent, as if they'd never been there at all. Sarah Beth was certain they'd been there the night before. She remembered their gentle tinkling as she'd sat outside with her evening tea. She walked around the property, thinking perhaps the wind had blown them down, but found no trace of them anywhere. It was puzzling, but not alarming enough to concern her greatly. Perhaps David had maintenance people who came by periodically. The day's planned activity was a jeep tour of the backcountry, something she'd booked online before her trip. The tour guide, a weathered man named Frank who'd lived in Sedona for 30 years, was knowledgeable and entertaining. But even his enthusiasm couldn't shake the odd feeling that had settled over her. "You okay, ma'am?" Frank asked during one of their stops at a scenic overlook. "You seem a little distracted today." Sarah Beth forced a smile. "Just tired, I think. It's been a busy few days." But it wasn't tiredness, it was something else, something that felt almost like being watched. During the tour, she found herself looking over her shoulder, scanning the landscape for signs of movement that were never there. The feeling was so foreign to her usually optimistic nature that it was deeply unsettling. When she returned to the casita that afternoon, Sarah Beth decided to stay in for the evening. She made a simple dinner from groceries she'd bought earlier, poured herself a glass of wine, and settled in to read a book she'd brought about Sedona's history. But concentration proved elusive. The silence around the property felt heavier now, almost thick. In Ohio, there was always ambient noise, traffic in the distance, neighbors' televisions, dogs barking. Here, the quiet was so complete, it seemed to press against her eardrums. Every small sound she made, the clink of her wineglass, the rustle of turning pages, seemed amplified. As darkness fell, Sarah Beth found herself checking the locks on the doors multiple times. The front door, the sliding patio door, even the windows, though she couldn't remember opening any of them. Each time, everything was secure, but the compulsion to check again would return within minutes. She tried calling Jennifer, but reached voicemail. Her daughter was probably at her book club. It was Thursday evening, after all. Sarah Beth left a brief message saying she was fine, but might cut the trip short by a day or two. Even as she said it, she wasn't sure why. The bedroom felt different. That night too. Not physically, everything was exactly as she'd left it, but the atmosphere was somehow charged, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Sarah Beth lay in bed listening to sounds that weren't quite sounds, the settling of the house, the whisper of wind through the desert plants, her own heartbeat that seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. She must have dozed off eventually, because she woke with a start sometime after midnight. The digital clock beside the bed read 2:17 a.m. Something had awakened her, but she couldn't identify what. She lay still, listening, but heard nothing beyond the usual night sounds. Then she noticed the light. A thin sliver of illumination was visible under the bedroom door, not bright, just enough to suggest that a lamp was on in the living area. Sarah Beth was certain she'd turned off all the lights before bed. She was meticulous about such things, a habit formed over decades of managing a household budget. Her first thought was that perhaps the lamp was on a timer, though she didn't remember seeing any automatic controls. Her second thought was more unsettling. What if someone else was in the house? Sarah Beth lay in the darkness, her heart rate increasing as she tried to decide what to do. If there was an intruder, her phone was her only lifeline, and it was charging on the nightstand just within reach. Moving as quietly as possible, she slipped her hand toward the device. The phone's screen showed no signal bars. None at all. That was impossible. She'd had full service when she'd tried to call Jennifer earlier. She'd been texting and checking Facebook without any problems throughout the day. Fear began to creep in, cold and insistent. Sarah Beth sat up in bed, straining to hear any sound from beyond the bedroom door. The house remained silent, but that sliver of light persisted, steady and unexplained. Minutes passed. She couldn't tell how many before she worked up the courage to get out of bed. Moving with the careful steps of someone trying not to make a sound, she approached the bedroom door and pressed her ear against it. Nothing. Just the maddening quiet that had characterized the entire evening. Her hand trembled slightly as she grasped the door handle. It turned easily, silently, and she opened the door just wide enough to peer into the living area. The room was exactly as she'd left it, except for one thing. The small lamp beside the sofa was indeed on, casting its warm glow across the space. But Sarah Beth was absolutely certain she'd turned it off. She had a clear memory of doing so before checking the locks one final time. She stood in the doorway for several minutes, scanning every corner of the visible area for signs of disturbance. Everything else appeared normal. Her book still on the coffee table where she'd left it, her wine glass in the kitchen sink, her purse on the dining table. Nothing was missing or moved. Perhaps the lamp was on a timer after all, or maybe she'd been more tired than she'd realized and simply forgotten to turn it off. These explanations felt hollow, but they were better than the alternatives her mind was beginning to suggest. Sarah Beth crept across the living room and turned off the lamp, plunging the space back into darkness. She checked the front door lock, again still secure, and the patio door as well. Everything was as it should be, yet the feeling of wrongness persisted. Back in the bedroom, she plugged her phone into the charger again and noticed that the signal bars had returned. 3 out of 4 bars, exactly what she'd had earlier. It was as if the service had just randomly cut out for a while, though she'd never experienced anything like that before. Sleep was elusive for the rest of the night. Every small sound made her alert and listening, and the approaching dawn brought relief she didn't want to examine too closely. By the time morning light filled the bedroom, Sarah Beth had made a decision. She would pack up and leave that day. The feeling wasn't rational, and she couldn't explain it to herself, let alone to Jennifer. But 68 years of life had taught her to trust her instincts, and her instincts were telling her that something about this place was wrong. She was in the kitchen making coffee when her phone rang. Jennifer's name appeared on the screen, and Sarah Beth felt a rush of relief at hearing her daughter's familiar voice. "Mom, I got your message last night. You sounded strange. Are you okay?" Sarah Beth hesitated, unsure how to explain her feelings without sounding paranoid or confused. "I'm fine, honey. I just think I'm ready to come home a little early. The casita is lovely, but I miss my own bed." "That doesn't sound like you. You've been planning this trip for months. What's really going on?" "Nothing specific, just a feeling." Sarah Beth looked around the kitchen, noting how normal everything appeared in the daylight. "Maybe I'm not as adventurous as I thought." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "Do you want me to call the airlines, see if we can move your flight up?" "That would be wonderful, sweetheart. I was thinking maybe tomorrow instead of Sunday." "Consider it done, and Mom, trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't." After the call, Sarah Beth felt better about her decision. She'd pack up her things, send David a polite message about leaving early due to a family matter, and be on her way. The strange feelings of the night before already seemed less significant in the bright morning light. She was folding clothes into her suitcase when she heard a car in the driveway. Through the bedroom window, she could see a dark sedan parked behind her rental car. A man in casual clothes was walking toward the front gate, and for a moment Sarah Beth thought it might be David coming to check on the property. But as the man got closer, she could see that he didn't match the photos from David's profile. This man was taller, older, with graying hair and a serious expression. He carried what looked like a folder or clipboard in his hand. Sarah Beth watched as he tried the gate, found it unlocked, and approached the front door. When the knock came, firm but not aggressive, she felt her stomach tighten with apprehension. "Mrs. Williams," the man called through the door. "I'm Detective Morrison with the Sedona Police. I'd like to speak with you if you have a moment." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Police, what could they possibly want with her? Sarah Beth's mind raced through possibilities. Had something happened to Jennifer? Was there some kind of emergency back home? She opened the door to find a man in his 50s with kind but serious eyes. He showed her his badge, which looked official enough, though Sarah Beth had no real way to verify it. "I'm sorry to disturb you, ma'am, but I need to ask you a few questions about this property and your stay here." "Is everything all right, Detective? Has something happened?" Detective Morrison glanced past her into the casita, then back to her face. "That's what I'm trying to determine. Mrs. Williams, are you aware that this property isn't legally registered as a short-term rental with the city of Sedona?" Sarah Beth felt confusion wash over her. "I don't understand. I booked it through Airbnb. There were hundreds of reviews." "Yes, we're aware of the listing. That's actually why I'm here." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Mrs. Williams, you're the fourth person to stay at this address in the past 6 months. The 3 previous guests have all reported unusual experiences during their stays." The bottom seemed to drop out of Sarah Beth's stomach. "What kind of unusual experiences?" "Primarily feelings of unease, electronic devices malfunctioning, and a general sense that something wasn't right with the property." Detective Morrison's voice was gentle but serious. "2 of the guests left early, just as you apparently planned to do. The 3rd guest..." He trailed off, and Sarah Beth felt ice forming in her veins. "What about the 3rd guest, Detective?" "The 3rd guest was a woman about your age from Colorado. She was scheduled to check out 5 days ago. We haven't been able to locate her." The words hit Sarah Beth like a physical blow. Missing. Another woman, someone her age, who had stayed in this very casita and then simply vanished. The morning sunshine that had felt so reassuring moments before now seemed weak and ineffective against the chill that was spreading through her body. "Missing?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean, missing?" "Detective." Morrison glanced around the quiet neighborhood before answering. "Mrs. Williams, would you mind if I came inside? This isn't really a conversation for the doorway." Sarah Beth stepped back, allowing him to enter the living room where she'd spent the last 3 days believing she was safe. Everything looked so normal in the daylight. The comfortable furniture, the southwestern decorations, the cheerful touches that had made her feel so welcome. How could this place be connected to someone's disappearance? "Please sit down, Detective," Morrison said gently, gesturing toward the sofa. "I know this is a lot to process." Sarah Beth perched on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Tell me about this woman. What happened to her?" The detective pulled out a small notebook and flipped through several pages. Her name was Margaret Chen, age 64, retired teacher from Boulder. She booked this place for a week-long retreat, said she wanted some quiet time to work on a memoir she was writing, very similar to your situation actually. And she just disappeared. According to her daughter, Margaret was supposed to check out last Tuesday and fly home that afternoon. When she didn't arrive in Denver and missed her connecting flight, the family became concerned. They tried calling her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. They contacted us yesterday. Sarah Beth felt her chest tightening. "Have you searched for her? I mean, maybe she decided to extend her stay or went somewhere else." "That's what we hoped initially, but when we tracked down the host, this David Martinez, we discovered some troubling inconsistencies." Detective Morrison leaned forward slightly, his expression grave. "Mrs. Williams, when did you last communicate with David?" "The day I arrived. He sent me a text asking if I'd found everything okay, and I replied that I had." "Why?" "Because according to Airbnb's records, David Martinez's account was deactivated 4 days ago. The phone number associated with his profile has been disconnected, and the credit card he used to verify his identity belongs to someone who's been deceased for 2 years. The room felt like it was spinning, slightly. Sarah Beth gripped the arm of the sofa to steady herself. That's impossible. I have all his messages, his profile information. There were hundreds of reviews. We've seen the reviews. Our tech team is looking into how they might have been fabricated, but these platforms can be surprisingly easy to manipulate if you know what you're doing. Detective Morrison's voice was patient but serious. Mrs. Williams, I need you to think carefully. Have you experienced anything unusual during your stay here? Anything that made you uncomfortable or seemed out of place? The events of the previous night came flooding back. The mysterious light, the complete loss of cell service, the wind chimes that had vanished without explanation. Things she'd tried to rationalize away now took on a more sinister significance. Last night, she began hesitantly, I woke up and there was a light on in the living room. I was sure I'd turned it off before bed. What else? My phone lost service completely for several hours. And when I arrived, there were wind chimes on the porch, but yesterday morning they were gone. She paused, feeling foolish for mentioning such small details. It probably sounds silly. Nothing sounds silly in this context, Mrs. Williams. Margaret Chen's daughter mentioned that her mother had complained about electronic devices acting strangely during her stay. Phone service cutting in and out, her laptop shutting down unexpectedly, that sort of thing. Sarah Beth felt a chill run down her spine. Detective, what exactly do you think is happening here? Before he could answer, both of their phones chimed, simultaneously with text messages. Sarah Beth looked at her screen and felt her blood run cold. The message was from David Martinez's number, the same number Detective Morrison had just told her was disconnected. Welcome home, Sarah Beth. I hope you've been comfortable during your stay. Checkout isn't for several more days. Detective. Morrison was staring at his own phone with a grim expression. I just received the same message, Mrs. Williams, except mine says Detective Morrison. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. The detective was already standing, reaching for his radio. This is Morrison. I need a tech unit at 47. Coyote Ridge Drive immediately, and run another trace on the number I gave you earlier. It appears to be active again. Sarah Beth's hands were shaking as she stared at the message. Someone was watching them, knew exactly who they were and where they were. The feeling of being observed that had plagued her the day before suddenly made perfect sense and became infinitely more terrifying. Mrs. Williams, I need you to pack your things right now. We're leaving this property immediately. But all my belongings. My officers will help you gather everything, but we're not staying here another minute. Detective Morrison was moving toward the front door, speaking rapidly into his radio. And Mrs. Williams, I need you to call your daughter right now. Tell her where you are and that you're safe. Can you do that? Sarah Beth nodded, her fingers fumbling with her phone. Jennifer answered on the first ring as if she'd been waiting by the phone. Mom, I was just about to call you. I got your flight changed to this afternoon. Jennifer, listen to me. Sarah Beth's voice was steadier than she felt. I'm with a police detective right now. There's been some kind of situation with the Airbnb and we're leaving immediately. What? Mom, what's going on? Are you hurt? I'm fine, but there's been a woman who went missing from this same property. The police are investigating and they want me to leave right away. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. Missing? Mom, get out of there right now. I don't care about your luggage or anything else. Just get out. I am, sweetheart. The detective is helping me. I'm calling the airlines again. I'm getting you on the very next flight to Columbus, even if I have to pay full fare. And Mom, don't go anywhere alone until you're on that plane. By the time Sarah Beth ended the call, Detective Morrison had returned with 2 uniformed officers. The efficient way they began collecting her belongings and checking the property suggested this wasn't their first experience with unusual circumstances. Ma'am, one of the officers said, as he loaded her suitcase into his patrol car. Detective, Morrison wants you to know that we'll be escorting you directly to the airport. No stops, no detours. What about my rental car? We'll arrange for the rental company to collect it. Right now, our priority is getting you safely out of Sedona. As they prepared to leave, Sarah Beth took one last look at the casita that had seemed so charming just days before. In the bright morning light, it still looked like a perfectly normal vacation rental, but now she could see what her subconscious had been trying to tell her. Something about the place felt wrong. The windows were too dark, the desert landscaping too deliberately placed to create privacy, the isolation too complete. "Detective Morrison," she said as they walked toward the patrol cars. "The other guests who reported unusual experiences, where are they now?" "Safe, as far as we know. Both left Sedona immediately and returned home without incident. You're doing the right thing by leaving." "But Margaret Chen didn't leave." His expression darkened. "No. According to her daughter, Margaret was planning to extend her stay by a few days. She seemed to be enjoying the solitude and wanted more time to work on her writing." The implication hung heavy in the air. Sarah Beth had been planning to stay the full week as well, until the strange feelings had prompted her to cut the trip short. What might have happened if she hadn't trusted her instincts? The ride to the airport was a blur of red rock landscapes and concerned conversation. Detective Morrison sat in the front passenger seat, coordinating with other units and fielding calls from what sounded like federal authorities. The scope of the investigation was apparently much larger than Sarah Beth had initially realized. "Mrs. Williams," he said during a break in his radio communications, "I need to ask you not to discuss this situation on social media or with anyone other than immediate family for the time being. We're dealing with something that could have national implications." "National implications? I thought this was about a fraudulent Airbnb listing." "It started that way, but we've discovered similar properties in 6 other states, all with the same pattern. Fake hosts, manipulated reviews, and guests who report unusual experiences. Most leave early and don't look back, but a few," he trailed off. "A few what, detective?" "A few don't make it home." The Phoenix airport felt like a sanctuary after the tense morning in Sedona. Sarah Beth checked in for the first available flight to Columbus, grateful that Jennifer had indeed managed to change her ticket. She had 3 hours until departure, which she planned to spend in the most crowded public area she could find. Detective Morrison stayed with her until she'd gone through security, promising to keep her updated on the investigation's progress. He'd also given her his direct number and instructions to call immediately if anything unusual happened, even after she returned home. "Mrs. Williams," he said before leaving her at the security checkpoint, "you should know that your decision to trust your instincts probably saved your life. Margaret Chen's daughter mentioned that her mother had been experiencing the same strange feelings you described, but she chose to stay anyway. Do you think you'll find her?" His hesitation told her everything she needed to know. "We're doing everything we can." Sitting at the departure gate, surrounded by ordinary travelers going about their ordinary lives, Sarah Beth tried to process everything that had happened. Just that morning, she'd been a tourist with an inexplicable case of nerves. Now she was apparently a witness in a multi-state investigation involving missing persons and elaborate fraud schemes. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Flight tracking shows you're at the gate. Can't wait to see you tonight. Dad's favorite lasagna will be waiting." The mention of Jennifer's father, Sarah Beth's late husband, brought tears to her eyes. Thomas would have known what to make of all this. He'd always been the practical one, the problem solver, the one who could find rational explanations for the most confusing situations. She missed his steady presence more acutely than she had in months. Another text message appeared, this one from an unknown number. "Have a safe flight, Sarah Beth. Perhaps we'll meet again soon." Her hands began shaking so violently she nearly dropped the phone. She looked around the busy gate area, scanning faces for anyone who seemed to be watching her. Everyone appeared to be absorbed in their own activities, reading, working on laptops, talking on phones. But someone here had sent that message. Someone was close enough to know she was at the airport, at this specific gate. Sarah Beth fumbled for Detective Morrison's card and dialed his number with trembling fingers. "Morrison. Detective, I just received another text message. Someone here knows where I am. Stay exactly where you are. Don't move. Don't go to the bathroom. Don't get food. I'm sending airport security to your location right now. Should I call for help? Alert the gate agents?" "No. Act normally, but stay in the most crowded area possible. Security will identify themselves with the phrase 'Mrs. Chen sends her regards.'" Don't respond to anyone who doesn't use those exact words. The next 45 minutes were the longest of Sarah Beth's life. She sat rigid in her chair, trying to appear casual while carefully observing everyone around her. The boarding area gradually filled with passengers for her flight, and she scrutinized each new arrival for signs of unusual behavior. A man in a business suit approached her row of seats and sat down 2 chairs away. He was reading a newspaper and seemed completely ordinary, but something about his presence made Sarah Beth's skin crawl. He glanced at her once, briefly, and she caught a glimpse of cold, calculating eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her appearance. When airport security finally arrived, a woman in uniform who quietly spoke the phrase about Mrs. Chen, Sarah Beth nearly collapsed with relief. The security officer discreetly moved her to a different gate area and stayed with her until it was time to board. "Ma'am," the officer said as they walked toward the plane, "Detective Morrison asked me to tell you that they've identified the man who was sitting near you. He's not a passenger on your flight, and he left the airport shortly after you moved. They're tracking him now." Sarah Beth settled into her window seat, grateful to be surrounded by other passengers and crew members. As the plane taxied toward the runway, she looked out at the Arizona landscape she'd been so excited to explore just days before. Now all she wanted was to put as much distance as possible between herself and whatever was happening in Sedona. During the flight, she tried to make sense of everything Detective Morrison had told her. A network of fraudulent properties, missing, guests, elaborate schemes that spanned multiple states. It sounded like something out of a movie, not something that happened to ordinary widows on vacation. But Margaret Chen had been an ordinary woman too, a retired teacher, looking for some quiet time to work on her memoirs. What had happened to her in that casita? What had Sarah Beth narrowly escaped? The plane began its descent into Columbus as the sun was setting, painting the familiar Ohio landscape in golden hues that felt like a warm embrace. Sarah Beth had never been so happy to see the flat farmland and suburban sprawl of central Ohio. This was home, this was safe, this was where she belonged. Jennifer was waiting at the baggage claim with tears in her eyes and arms ready for the longest hug Sarah Beth had ever received from her daughter. "Mom, when I got your call this morning, I thought I might never see you again. I'm here, sweetheart, I'm safe. Promise me something," Jennifer said as they walked toward the parking garage. "Promise me you'll never travel alone again. I know you value your independence, but this whole experience..." Sarah Beth was about to agree when her phone buzzed with another text message. Without thinking, she glanced at the screen and felt her knees go weak. "Welcome home, Sarah Beth. Ohio is lovely this time of year." The message was from David Martinez's number again, the one that was supposed to be disconnected. But this time, there was an attachment, a photo of Jennifer's house taken from the street, showing both of their cars in the driveway. "Jennifer," Sarah Beth whispered, showing her daughter the phone. "We need to call Detective Morrison right now." Jennifer stared at the message, her face going pale. "Mom, how do they know where I live? How do they know we're here?" That was the question that would haunt Sarah Beth through the sleepless night. Ahead, and it was just the beginning of their nightmare. Jennifer's house, which had always been a place of comfort and family gatherings, felt like a fortress under siege. They'd called Detective Morrison immediately from the airport parking garage, and within an hour, 2 Ohio State police cruisers were stationed outside the modest colonial home where Jennifer had raised her own children. "This is unprecedented," Detective Morrison said during their video call that evening. He was back in Sedona, coordinating with what seemed to be a growing team of investigators. "We've never seen this level of surveillance and pursuit in any of the previous cases." Sarah Beth sat on Jennifer's couch, wrapped in her daughter's Afghan, trying to make sense of it all. "What makes me different? Why are they following me when the other guests were left alone after they left?" "That's what we're trying to figure out. Mrs. Williams, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. During your stay at the casita, did you see or hear anything that might have seemed like evidence of other people being there? Anything that suggested you weren't the only guest?" Sarah Beth closed her eyes, mentally retracing her time in Sedona. The strange silences, the feeling of being watched, the electronics malfunctioning. "I don't think so. The house always felt empty when I was there. But But what? There was one thing. On my second night, I thought I heard voices very briefly, like people talking quietly somewhere in the distance. I assumed it was neighbors, but now that I think about it, the houses on that street were quite far apart. Detective Morrison made notes on something off camera. What time was this? Late, maybe midnight or 1 in the morning. It only lasted a few seconds, and then it was quiet again. Mrs. Williams, I'm going to share something with you that we haven't released to the public yet. We believe these properties are being used as way stations, temporary holding locations for people who are being moved from one place to another against their will. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah Beth felt Jennifer's hand tighten on her shoulder as the full implication hit them both. Human trafficking, Jennifer whispered. We think so, yes. The profile fits. Remote locations, fake documentation, sophisticated surveillance capabilities. Solo travelers, especially older women, are vulnerable targets. They're less likely to be immediately missed, less likely to put up physical resistance, and more likely to have financial resources that can be exploited. Sarah Beth felt sick. Margaret Chen. We have teams searching for Margaret and the other missing individuals, but I won't lie to you. The longer someone is missing in these types of cases, the less likely we are to find them alive. The room fell silent except for the ticking of Jennifer's grandfather clock and the occasional radio chatter from the police cars outside. Sarah Beth tried to imagine what Margaret Chen might be going through at that very moment, and the thought was almost unbearable. Detective, Jennifer said, what can we do to keep my mother safe? These people obviously have resources and reach that extend far beyond Arizona. We're working with federal authorities now. The FBI has taken over the investigation, and they're treating this as a multi-state criminal enterprise. In the meantime, Mrs. Williams, I need you to vary your routines, stay in public places when possible, and never go anywhere alone. For how long? Sarah Beth asked. I can't live like a prisoner in my own life until we understand the full scope of this operation and neutralize the threat. Mrs. Williams, you may be the key to breaking this whole thing open. You're the first intended victim who escaped and can provide detailed information about the property and the methods they use. After the call ended, Jennifer made tea while Sarah Beth sat in stunned silence. The events of the past few days felt surreal, like something that happened to other people in news stories she read online. She was a retired librarian from a small Ohio town. How had she become entangled in an international criminal investigation? Mom, Jennifer said, returning with steaming mugs. I've been thinking, maybe you should stay here for a while, at least until this is resolved. Honey, I can't disrupt your life indefinitely. You have your job, your routine. My routine can adjust. My mother's safety is more important than my convenience. Jennifer's voice was firm in a way that reminded Sarah Beth of her late husband. Besides, I could use the company. The house has felt too empty since Kevin moved out for college. They were interrupted by a knock at the front door. Through the window, they could see one of the state police officers approaching. Jennifer answered, keeping the chain lock engaged. Ma'am, we just received word that there's been a development in the case. Detective Morrison would like to speak with Mrs. Williams again if possible. 10 minutes later, Detective Morrison's face appeared on Jennifer's laptop screen again, but this time his expression was different, more urgent, more concerned. Mrs. Williams, we've made a breakthrough, but it's brought some disturbing news. Our tech team traced the messages you received today. They're coming from a server farm in Eastern Europe, routed through multiple proxy servers to hide the original source. What does that mean? Sarah Beth asked. It means this operation is much larger and more sophisticated than we initially thought. The people behind this have international connections and significant technical resources. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. But there's more. We found Margaret Chen. Sarah Beth's heart leaped with hope. Is she alive? Is she okay? The detective's expression answered the question before his words did. She was found this morning in a warehouse outside Las Vegas. She'd been dead for approximately 2 days. This is key. Room spun around Sarah Beth. Another woman, someone just 4 years younger than herself. Someone who had simply wanted a peaceful vacation to work on her memoir. Gone. Dead. Because she'd stayed in the wrong Airbnb. The preliminary autopsy suggests She died of heart failure, Detective Morrison continued, but there are indications she'd been held against her will for several days before her death. Jennifer's hand found Sarah Beth's and squeezed tightly. Detective, what aren't you telling us? Mrs. Chen wasn't alone when she was found. There were 3 other victims in the same location, 2 women and 1 man, all solo travelers who had booked stays at similar properties over the past 6 months. 4 people. 4 innocent travelers who had trusted a platform they thought was safe, who had walked into situations that became their worst nightmares. Sarah Beth could have easily been the 5th. There's something else, Detective Morrison said. Mrs. Chen had your name and contact information written on a piece of paper hidden in her shoe. We don't know why, but somehow she knew about you. The implications of that statement sent chills through Sarah Beth's body. Margaret Chen had known her name while being held captive. Had they been planned as victims together? Was there supposed to be more than one guest at the casita at the same time? Detective, I need to know, am I still in danger? Mrs. Williams, I'm going to be completely honest with you. Yes, I believe you are still in significant danger. The fact that they've continued to track and contact you suggests they view you as unfinished business. These people don't like loose ends. Jennifer stood up abruptly, pacing to the window to check on the police cars outside. This is insane. My mother goes on a simple vacation and ends up being hunted by international criminals. Ma'am, I know it's difficult to accept, but your mother inadvertently stumbled into something much bigger than a vacation rental scam. She's now a witness who can identify locations, methods, and potentially people involved in a criminal enterprise that spans multiple countries. Sarah Beth felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd become entangled in. What happens now? Tomorrow morning, FBI agents will be arriving to conduct a more detailed interview with you. They'll want to know everything. Every conversation with David Martinez, every detail about the property, every unusual thing you experienced. The smallest detail could be crucial to their investigation. And after that? After that, we'll know more about what level of protection you'll need going forward. The call ended with promises to stay in touch and reminders to report anything unusual immediately. Sarah Beth and Jennifer sat in the quiet living room, both lost in their own thoughts about how dramatically their lives had changed in just one day. Mom, Jennifer said finally, I keep thinking about what might have happened if you hadn't trusted your instincts and left early. I try not to think about that. But you should think about it because it shows how strong you are. Most people would have convinced themselves they were being silly and stayed. Your survival instincts saved your life. Sarah Beth wasn't Sure, she felt strong. Mostly she felt terrified and confused. But Jennifer was right about one thing. Something deep inside her had recognized the danger, even when her conscious mind couldn't explain it. They decided to order dinner rather than cook, choosing a pizza place that delivered and would allow them to stay safely inside with their police protection. While they waited for the food, Sarah Beth called her son Michael in California to explain the situation. His reaction was immediate and predictable. Mom, I'm flying out tomorrow. You shouldn't be dealing with this alone. Jennifer's here and the police are protecting us. You don't need to. Yes, I do need to. This is my mother we're talking about. I'll be on the first flight I can book. After convincing Michael to wait until they knew more from the FBI interview, Sarah Beth tried to call her younger son, David, in Atlanta. The call went straight to voicemail, which was unusual for him. She left a message asking him to call back as soon as possible. The pizza arrived just as her phone rang with an unknown number. Sarah Beth hesitated, remembering Detective Morrison's warnings about answering calls from unfamiliar numbers. Let it go to voicemail, Jennifer advised. But when the voicemail notification appeared, there was no message. Just a 30-second recording of silence followed by a soft click. 5 minutes later, the same number called again. This time, when it went to voicemail, there was a message. A woman's voice speaking so quietly they had to turn the volume all the way up to hear her. Sarah Beth, if you can hear this, don't trust anyone. They're not who they seem. The police or the FBI could check everything. Margaret tried to warn us, but it was too late. Don't make the same mistake. Trust no one. The message ended abruptly, leaving Sarah Beth and Jennifer staring at the phone in horror. Mom, that sounded like an older woman. Do you think? It can't be Margaret. Detective Morrison said she died 2 days ago. But even as Sarah Beth said the words, doubt crept into her mind. What if the detective was wrong? What if Margaret was still alive, still being held somewhere, trying to warn other potential victims? Or what if this was another part of whatever psychological game these criminals were playing with her? Jennifer immediately called the state police officers outside, who contacted Detective Morrison. Within minutes, their phones were ringing, with return calls from law enforcement. "Mrs. Williams," Detective Morrison said, "we need you to forward that voicemail to our tech team immediately. And I need to ask, did that voice sound familiar to you at all?" Sarah Beth listened to the recording again, trying to focus on the speaker's tone and accent rather than the terrifying content of the message. "I don't think I've ever heard this person before, but it's hard to tell with how quietly she was speaking. We'll have our voice analysis experts examine it, but Mrs. Williams, I need you to understand something. The investigation into Margaret Chen's death is being handled with the highest levels of security and confidentiality. Very few people knew the details we shared with you earlier today." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that either someone leaked information from our investigation, or that message came from someone who has inside knowledge of this case." The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Either there was a leak in law enforcement, or Margaret Chen was somehow still alive and able to communicate. Neither possibility offered much comfort. "Detective," Jennifer interrupted, "the woman in the message warned my mother not to trust. The police or the FBI? What if this whole investigation is compromised?" "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but you need to remember that psychological manipulation is a key component of how these criminal organizations operate. They want to isolate their victims, make them distrust the very people who are trying to help them." Sarah Beth looked at her daughter's worried face and made a decision that surprised even herself. "Detective Morrison, I appreciate everything you've done to help me, but I think Jennifer and I need some time to process all of this. We'll be in touch tomorrow before the FBI interview." "Mrs. Williams, I strongly advise against cutting off communication with—" Sarah Beth ended the call. "Mom, what are you doing?" Jennifer asked. "If you can't trust the police, who can you trust?" "Right now, sweetheart, I can only trust you. And maybe that's enough for tonight." They spent the evening going through every detail of Sarah Beth's trip, writing down everything she could remember about David Martinez, the casita, and her interactions with Detective Morrison. If tomorrow's FBI interview was going to determine her safety going forward, she wanted to be as prepared as possible. But as they worked, the mysterious woman's warning echoed in Sarah Beth's mind. Don't trust anyone. They're not who they seem. What if the people claiming to protect her were actually part of the very organization that had targeted her in the first place? Sarah Beth barely slept that night, her mind churning through possibilities and questions that seemed to multiply with each passing hour. Jennifer had insisted they share the guest room, pulling in an air mattress so neither of them would be alone. They lay in the darkness, whispering about their fears and trying to make sense of the warning message that had turned their world upside down once again. "Mom," Jennifer said around 3 in the morning, "I keep thinking about Detective Morrison. Something about him felt off from the beginning, but I couldn't put my finger on what." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. How did he know to come to the casita that morning? You hadn't reported anything missing or called for help. He just showed up, knowing exactly who you were and why you were there." Sarah Beth turned the timeline over in her mind. Jennifer was right. Detective Morrison's arrival had seemed coincidental at the time, but now it felt suspiciously convenient. He said other guests had reported unusual experiences. But why would those guests report their experiences to the Sedona police specifically? Most people would just leave and never think about it again, especially if they felt silly about their concerns. The more they discussed it, the more troubling Detective Morrison's involvement seemed. His knowledge had been too detailed, his responses too prepared, his ability to track the mysterious messages too convenient. "Jennifer," Sarah Beth whispered, "what if he's not really a detective at all?" "That's exactly what I've been thinking." They were quiet for a long moment, both contemplating the terrifying possibility that the person they'd trusted to protect Sarah Beth might actually be connected to the people who had targeted her. "We need to verify his identity," Jennifer said finally. "First thing in the morning, before the FBI interview, we'll call the Sedona Police Department directly and ask about Detective Morrison." When dawn finally broke, they were both exhausted but determined. Jennifer made coffee while Sarah Beth called information to get the main number for the Sedona Police Department. Her heart was pounding as she waited for someone to answer. "Sedona Police, how can I help you?" "Hello, I need to verify the employment of one of your detectives." "Detective Morrison?" "He's been working on a case involving missing persons and Airbnb rentals." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ma'am, could you spell that last name for me?" Sarah Beth spelled it out, waiting while the dispatcher presumably checked their records. "Ma'am, I don't show any Detective Morrison on our roster. We have Detective Martinez and Detective Murphy, but no Morrison. Could you have the name wrong?" Sarah Beth's blood turned to ice. "No Morrison at all? Are you certain?" "Positive, ma'am. We're a small department. I know all our detectives personally. Is there something I can help you with?" Sarah Beth quickly explained the situation, describing the man who had claimed to be Detective Morrison and the investigation he said he was conducting. The dispatcher's responses became increasingly concerned as the story unfolded. "Ma'am, this sounds like a serious case of impersonation of a law enforcement officer. I need to transfer you to our actual detective division immediately." 20 minutes later, Sarah Beth was speaking with Detective Martinez, a woman who confirmed that the Sedona Police Department had no active investigations involving Airbnb properties or missing persons. More alarming still, when Sarah Beth described the casita on Coyote Ridge Drive, Detective Martinez told her that no such address existed in Sedona. "Mrs. Williams, I think you need to contact the FBI directly. What you're describing sounds like an elaborate criminal scheme, but none of it involved our department or our city." After ending the call, Sarah Beth and Jennifer sat in stunned silence. Everything, the detective, the police cars, the entire investigation, had been fake. Sarah Beth had been manipulated from the moment she'd decided to leave the casita early. "Mum," Jennifer said slowly, "if Detective Morrison was fake, then who were those state police officers outside last night?" They looked toward the front window, where the patrol cars had been stationed. The street was empty, the officers were gone with no explanation and no goodbye. "We have to leave," Sarah Beth said, standing up quickly. "Right now. If they're not real police, then we're not under protection, we're under surveillance." Jennifer was already moving, grabbing car keys and her purse. "Where do we go?" "Somewhere public, somewhere safe. And then we call the real FBI." They were halfway to the garage when Sarah Beth's phone rang. The caller ID showed Detective Morrison's number. With shaking hands, she answered the call and put it on speaker. "Good morning, Sarah Beth. I trust you slept well?" The voice was the same, but now Sarah Beth could hear something in it that she'd missed before. A cold amusement, a predatory satisfaction. "Who are you?" she demanded. "What do you want from me?" "I think you already know the answer to that." "You're a very intelligent woman, Sarah Beth. Much more perceptive than poor Margaret was." "Is Margaret still alive?" "Margaret served her purpose, just as you will serve yours. But first, we need to have a conversation about your cooperation." Jennifer grabbed the phone from her mother's hand. "Listen to me, you sick freak. We know you're not police. We know this whole thing is fake. And we're going to make sure everyone knows what you're doing." There was a pause, then a chuckle that made both women's skin crawl. "Jennifer isn't..." "Sayed lives at 342 Maple Street, works at Morrison Elementary School. Ironic name, don't you think? Divorced, 2 children, Kevin at Ohio State and Emma at home. Such a lovely family." Jennifer's face went white. "How do you know about my children?" "We know about everyone who matters to Sarah Beth. Your brother Michael in San Diego, your brother David in Atlanta." "Oh wait, you haven't been able to reach David, have you?" "That's because David is currently our guest, just as Margaret was." Sarah Beth felt the room spinning around her. "You have David? My son?" "He's safe, for now. Whether he remains safe depends entirely on your cooperation, Sarah Beth." "What do you want?" "It's very simple. You're going to return to Arizona. You're going to check into a property we'll designate for you. And you're going to stop interfering with our business operations." And if I don't, then David will join Margaret and the others, and after David we'll move on to Michael, then to Jennifer, then to her children. We have infinite patience and considerable resources." The line went dead, leaving Sarah Beth and Jennifer frozen in terror. The scope of the threat was beyond anything they'd imagined. These people, whoever they were, had been watching Sarah Beth's entire family, gathering information, positioning themselves to destroy everyone she loved. "Mom, we have to call the FBI right now. The real FBI. But what about David? If we involve law enforcement, they might. If we don't involve law enforcement, they definitely will. Mom, these people are professionals. This isn't something we can handle alone." Jennifer was right. But the thought of putting David in more danger was almost unbearable. Sarah Beth tried calling his number again, but it went straight to voicemail, just as it had for the past 2 days. They drove to the nearest FBI field office, constantly checking their mirrors for signs of being followed. The federal building felt like a fortress after the nightmare of the past 24 hours, and when they were finally seated across from Special Agent Claire Thompson, Sarah Beth felt the first glimmer of hope she'd experienced since leaving Sedona. Agent Thompson listened to their story with growing interest and concern. Unlike the fake Detective Morrison, she asked detailed questions about timelines and evidence, took careful notes, and immediately began making calls to verify their account. "Mrs. Williams," she said after spending an hour gathering information, "you've stumbled into what we believe is one of the most sophisticated human trafficking operations we've ever encountered. We've been investigating similar disappearances across multiple states for the past 2 years. Have you been able to rescue any of the victims?" Agent Thompson's expression was grim. "Some, but these people are very good at covering their tracks and eliminating evidence. The fact that they've invested this much effort in pursuing you suggests they see you as a significant threat to their operation." "Because I escaped?" "Because you escaped and lived to tell about it. Most of their victims are chosen specifically because their disappearances won't be immediately noticed or investigated. Solo travelers, people estranged from family, individuals with minimal social connections. You don't fit that profile." Jennifer leaned forward. "Agent Thompson, they have my uncle, my mother's son David. They're using him to force her to comply with their demands." "So I see him. We'll immediately issue a BOLO alert for David Williams and begin coordinating with law enforcement in Atlanta. But Mrs. Williams, I need you to understand that we cannot guarantee your son's safety if you comply with their demands. These people don't honor agreements and they don't leave witnesses. Then what do? We use you as bait." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah Beth felt Jennifer's hand grip hers tightly as Agent Thompson continued. "You would be under constant surveillance, wearing recording devices, and surrounded by federal agents posing as civilians. When they take you to wherever they're holding the other victims, we'll be ready to move. And if something goes wrong? If they realize it's a trap. There are risks, Mrs. Williams, I won't lie to you about that, but it may be the only chance we have to save your son and the other victims who are still alive." Sarah Beth looked at her daughter's terrified face and thought about David, somewhere in captivity, probably wondering why no one was looking for him. She thought about Margaret Chen and the other travelers who had simply wanted to see new places and experience new things, just as she had. How long would I have to think about it? They'll expect an answer soon. The longer we wait, the more likely they are to move the victims to a new location where we can't find them. That evening, back at Jennifer's house with real FBI protection this time, Sarah Beth made the hardest decision of her life. She would return to Arizona and walk back into the nightmare that had started with a simple dream of seeing the Southwest. The operation took place 3 days later. Sarah Beth flew to Phoenix, wearing a wire so sophisticated she couldn't even tell where it was hidden in her clothing. FBI agents filled the plane, though she couldn't identify any of them. She was supposed to check into a different property, another Airbnb rental that the fake Detective Morrison had directed her to through a series of text messages. This time, the address was real, located in a remote area outside Phoenix, where the nearest neighbor was miles away. Sarah Beth's hands shook as she turned the key in the lockbox, knowing that federal agents were positioned throughout the area, but feeling utterly alone as she entered what might be her final destination. The house was larger than the Sedona casita, with multiple bedrooms and a basement that made Sarah Beth's skin crawl. But it wasn't until she heard the voices coming from below that she realized she'd found what they'd been looking for. David's voice, weak but recognizable, talking quietly to someone else. Other voices too, at least 3 or 4 people who sounded tired and afraid, but very much alive. Sarah Beth pressed the small button on her watch that would signal the FBI to move in, then crept toward the basement stairs. She needed to see her son, needed to know he was okay, even if it meant walking into the hands of the people who had orchestrated this entire nightmare. The basement was larger than she'd expected, divided into several small rooms with locks on the outside of the doors. Through a partially open door, she could see David sitting on a narrow bed, talking to a woman with gray hair who was writing in a notebook. "David?" she whispered. Her son's head snapped up, his eyes widening in disbelief and terror. "Mom! Oh God, Mom, why are you here? They said they were going to let me go if you cooperated." "I did cooperate, sweetheart, but I brought help." The woman with the notebook looked up, and Sarah Beth realized she was looking at Margaret Chen. Very much alive, very much a prisoner, but alive. "You're Sarah Beth," Margaret said softly. "I tried to warn you. I managed to get one message out before they caught me using the phone. The voicemail, that was you. I was trying to tell you not to trust the police, but they found me before I could explain properly." The man pretending to be Detective Morrison, he's the one who runs this operation. His real name is Marcus Webb, and he's been using law enforcement credentials to gain victims' trust for years. The sound of footsteps upstairs made all 3 of them freeze. Sarah Beth looked toward the basement stairs, praying that the sounds meant the FBI had arrived, but knowing they could just as easily mean their captors were coming. Marcus Webb's voice echoed from the top of the stairs. "Sarah Beth, I know you're down there, and I know you brought friends." The next few minutes were chaos. Shouts, running footsteps, the sounds of doors being kicked in. Sarah Beth hugged David tightly as FBI agents flooded the basement, securing the area and beginning the process of freeing the prisoners. There were 6 victims in total, including Margaret and David. All alive, all traumatized, but all going home to their families. Marcus Webb and 3 associates were arrested, along with evidence that would eventually dismantle a network spanning 12 states and involving dozens of fraudulent properties. 3 months later, Sarah Beth sat in her own living room in Ohio, looking through photo albums with Jennifer and her grandchildren. The nightmare was over. The criminals were in federal prison awaiting trial, and life was slowly returning to normal. But she would never travel alone again. Some dreams, she'd learned, carried too high a price. "Grandma," Emma asked, curling up beside her, "are you glad you went on that trip to Arizona?" Sarah Beth considered the question seriously. The experience had been terrifying, traumatic, and life-changing in ways she was still processing. But it had also led to the rescue of 6 people who might have disappeared forever, and the shutdown of an operation that had been destroying lives for years. "I'm glad I trusted my instincts, sweetheart, and I'm glad I came home safe to all of you." David, who was staying with them while he recovered from his ordeal, looked up from the book he was reading. "Mom, Agent Thompson called earlier. She wanted you to know that the trial date has been set and they're confident in their case." "Good," Sarah Beth said simply. Margaret and the others deserve justice. As evening fell and the family settled, in for a quiet night at home, Sarah Beth reflected on the journey that had started with a simple desire to see red rocks and ended with her helping to save lives. She'd learned that evil could hide behind the most innocent-seeming facades, but she'd also learned that her own strength and intuition were more powerful than she'd ever imagined. The nightmares still came sometimes, but they were fading. And when people asked her about solo travel now, she didn't discourage them. She just reminded them to trust their instincts, stay connected with family, and remember that the most beautiful destinations could sometimes hide the darkest secrets. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about the courage it takes to trust your instincts when everything seems normal on the surface, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Sarah Beth's story reminds us that ordinary people can find extraordinary strength when faced with unimaginable challenges. Her journey from a hopeful traveler to a survivor who helped save others shows us that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to make a difference. Leave a comment below and tell us about a time when your intuition warned you about a situation that seemed safe on the surface. Share this video with someone who might need to hear Sarah Beth's story. And remember, your instincts are there for a reason. Trust them, even when you can't explain why. Until next time, stay safe, stay strong, and keep looking out for one another.